Funding for Amish cooking from Quilt Country with Marcia Adams was provided by
Sauter Woodworking, America's furniture craftsman.
And by Marilat Industries, America's cabinet maker, committed to quality in a variety of kitchen and bath cabinetry styles.
Hello, I'm Marcia Adams. Today we're going to make several soups which are usually a part of every typical Amish and Mennonite meal, especially in the winter. As in European kitchens, leftover scraps of food, bones from roast, bits of broth, as well as cooking liquid end up in the ever-simmering, ever-ready soup. Many people ask me about the food served in Amish and Mennonite restaurants, which are, incidentally, famous for their homemade soups. But because of their religious beliefs and lifestyle, it's very unlikely that you will find an Amish-operated restaurant, but you do find Mennonite restaurants serving Amish-style food. During the research for the cookbook and television series, I interviewed a warm and ebullient Mennonite woman at her restaurant in Indiana. Her name is Suetta, and she's known for her enormous cinnamon rolls dolloped with frosting, and her homemade bread, and her hearty soups. Suetta Bechtel is the owner and cook of the Oil Lamp Restaurant at New Paris. She serves Mennonite and Amish food and came from a Mennonite family of 17 children. So learning how to cook was a skill she learned early. Suetta, have you made these soup recipes from recipes that you brought from home as a girl?
No, I just basically, we put our ingredient together as we were taught, and we alter the amounts according to our taste.
Okay, what kind of soups do we have here today?
Okay, I have a navy bean soup or ham and bean soup and beef rivel soup, which is a rivel soup is an old-time standby for being inexpensive to make. You have all your ingredient in your home and all of the time. Bean soup as well is the same.
Now you're simmering these beans to soften them up a bit. Should we do the rivel soup first, do you think?
I'll make my rivels. The beef broth is boiling, and I'll put my pieces of beef in there that I have prepared for that.
You've pre-cooked those then?
Yes, the beef and the broth, usually it would be a can of canned beef or leftover beef, the juice from a roast.
Now you're going to add eggs to the flour to make the rivels.
I use a combination of 1 cup of flour, 1 large egg, and then I mix it with 2 forks. Some people go in with their hands, but 2 forks, mixing it, pulling it apart, eventually you will have your rivels that you'll mix into the... And we use the same type of rivels in the potato soup that I'll show you
a little later on.
Or we can talk about some potato soup.
Oh, you're just going to drop that. You're not even dropping it in, you're shaking it in.
No, I shake it in and whip it with a wire whip to...
This is really...
While my broth is boiling. And then that will simmer for about 10 minutes for the rivels to be cooked all the way through.
It's really sort of a noodle that hasn't been rolled out, isn't it?
Right. It's a quick to fix noodle. Okay, that will get nice and thick now. We'll just let that simmer. The ham and bean soup we do differently here than when I was growing up at home. During the Depression, they simply made do with what they had. And meat was often not part of the diet, especially with soups. And they cooked their beans with onion and celery and then put milk into it, and we ate it with crackers or dry bread. That was our soup, bean soup.
Today, Suetta makes her bean soup with ham, not like she did during the Depression. And we'll do a version of that soup, as well as another one of her specialties, potato soup, which we're going to prepare right now. In my saucepan, I have pre-cooked 8 slices of bacon. It's all been chopped up. And then I've sauteed it with 1/4 cup of celery and 1/2 cup of onion. That's going to give us a lot of good flavor. This is a classic farm dish and is made in many different ways. Some cooks add no meat at all, but I like it with the bacon, and sometimes I add ham or sausage. Other cooks will add rivels, which makes a really thick soup. And to this, we're going to add 3 cups of chopped potatoes. You can see the size. This is going to enable them to cook quite fast. And then 2.5 cups of water. And the seasonings will be, here we have a bay leaf and 1/2 of a teaspoon of salt and 1/4 of a teaspoon each of nutmeg, marjoram, celery salt, and pepper. This is going to simmer just about 15 minutes, and truly at the end of the cooking period, the potatoes will have absorbed most of that liquid. This is one of those dishes that's still frequently made because it's hearty and inexpensive. And certainly, potatoes and bacon and onion and milk are always on hand in your kitchen. We're going to let this simmer now. In Pennsylvania, thin, brothy soups were called stipple. Don't you love that word? And certainly, this next soup would fall into that category. Frequently, they would have some thickening added to them, such as rivels or even dumplings. And this particular stipple we're making today has Crackerball dumplings. It's sort of an Amish matzo ball. And we begin with 1 egg, and this is going to bind all this together. Put that up quickly. And then we're going to add some good seasonings. You could add 2 tablespoons of butter, or you could use a vegetable oil if you like, and a teaspoon of parsley, and a teaspoon of minced onion, or a little more, and 1/4 teaspoon of celery salt and pepper. And then mix that together. And add anywhere from 6 tablespoons to 1/2 cup of cracker meal. Now, this would depend somewhat on the weather, believe me, about how much cracker meal you need. And then we're going to add 2 tablespoons of milk. Beat all this together. And then we're going to make cracker balls about the size, well, we would say in the country, the size of buckeyes, but maybe large marbles would be more appropriate. And they're just a bit damp at this point, but that's okay. You're going to allow these to stand for 30 minutes before you drop them in simmering chicken broth. See how I'm doing this? They're really staying together quite well. We have some here that we made earlier, and you can see that they're very firm. That 30-minute stand brought all of the ingredients together. And then we drop them into 2 quarts of simmering chicken broth. This Crackerball dumpling must be made with saltine cracker crumbs instead of matzo meal. I do want to say that. And you should not use cocktail crackers. They simply won't work. Now, cook this over simmering, that would be medium-low, for 10 minutes. And like all dumplings, do not raise the lid or you'll have problems. I made this soup earlier. Doesn't it look delectable? And it's so easy. Serve it as a first course with fresh thyme scattered over the top. Again, you want a good homemade chicken stock so you have real flavor. It's worth the extra time, believe me. Let's see how these potatoes are going. Oh, they're doing pretty good. I told you earlier that I would show you a variation of bean soup. In some communities, the Amish are still serving navy bean soup after their church services. And it's made with white navy beans that we're all acquainted with. But this recipe I'm going to show you is called 9-bean soup, and it's made from a mixture of beans. I buy all of these beans in bulk at a food co-op in 1-pound bags that I measure out by myself. And here you can see that I have 8 kinds of beans and barley. All of these are in 1 pound each increments. Now we get to mix them together. Let me tell you though, before I do that, what I have here. I have garbanzos, lentils, kidney beans, baby limas, pintos, white navy beans, green peas, and black beans. And in the center is this barley. Here comes the fun part. Mess, mess, mess. cooking is so tactile. I think that's why people like to do it. It's sort of, we're still getting to play in the mud pie or syndrome or something, which was terribly satisfying to us as children. And we just never outgrow it. We just sort of sublimate it. There we have this great mixture. Divide this into 9 one-pound bags, and to that, you're going to each bag add one of these hot chili peppers. Now these are kind of fiery, so don't rub your eyes after you've handled them, but they really add quite a bit of flavor and pungency to the soup. This makes 9 recipes of soup mix, and then bag them up, if you like, and give it as gifts. One time I made a 14-bean soup using 14 kinds of beans. That made sort of a jolly mess, but I really enjoyed it. If you add a bow to the bag, you have something that's really quite decorative, and be sure to include the recipe. To make this soup, you soak the beans overnight in water. Incidentally, if you have trouble digesting beans, drain off the soaking water and begin the recipe with fresh water. In the kettle, I've cooked for 2 hours, 2 quarts of fresh water and the beans that have been pre-soaked. And for this particular recipe today, we used turkey legs as the meat. Now, the reason I did that is because it's low fat. As you know, turkey is low fat. But I do want to tell you that you can also use an uncooked chuck roast, or you can use a leftover ham bone with scraps. And then we will take off this yucky looking skin and debone it. Set this meat aside because you're going to add it just before you serve it. This looks a bit murky, but trust me, it'll turn out all right. We're going to finish it up. Add a cup of onion to your food processor. That's more than a cup. Just do a generous big onion, and a 28-ounce can of tomatoes with juice. And you want to pulse this 2 or 3 times just to chop it up. This is going to add a lot of color and a lot of flavor, as you can tell. Now we're going to add the seasonings, which are simple, but really good. Add about 2 tablespoons of fresh lemon juice. The seasoning today is chili powder, but also I like to add cumin when I use turkey because I think I think that cumin marries very well with turkey. And if you don't like those seasonings, I would suggest adding maybe a tablespoon of dried herbs, anything you want. And then we're going to add a nice amount, perhaps a handful of brown sugar. That's going to give some real undertone of flavor to this soup. And then a handful of any pasta that you might have on hand. We're using elbow macaroni today. Let's see, I need a big spoon to give this a stir. Now, you can see how much better looking this soup is right now by just having added these things. And we're going to cover it up and let it simmer 1 more hour, and then add the chopped up turkey meat and serve. The finished product is such an elegant soup. Use this soup for entertaining. Add a loaf of homemade bread or some sort of fancy biscuit and end with a light fruit dessert. By the way, a nice way to serve soup is from a tureen set on the table. I have a few examples to show you. They range from formal to informal to just plain whimsical, almost camp. Serving soup in a tureen really adds panache and style to your table, and they have other uses as well. It's generally a good investment. In the Midwest, we call brown stock beef broth, and I think all cooks should have a supply of it on hand in the freezer. I make it in large amounts. It's economical, and of course, I must tell you that I think the commercial tastes very salty and very canned. We're going to have some bones nicely browned here in the oven. Generally begin with beef bones for brown stock, and you can use any sort of red meat except mutton. Mutton bones are simply too strong. And brown stock is always made with these red meat bones roasted in the oven along with lots of vegetables. The darker color and intense flavoring comes from the almost caramelization of these ingredients as they bake in this hot oven. As you see, these bones are all cut in rather short pieces. That's so the flavor in the bones and the marrow comes out into the stock. And the vegetables, and let me give you the recipe for my brown stock. I start with 5 pounds of bones. You can see how they cook up. And perhaps 6 carrots and 3 large onions. And do leave the skin on the onions when you make brown stock because that adds extra flavor and extra color. And I sometimes like to add parsnips to this mixture because it adds sweetness. And incidentally, parsnips are very good in stew. And then we have some celery in here, which is almost not identifiable at this point, but that's the way it's supposed to be. Any fragrant plant that is used as a flavoring is called an aromatic. And this would include the carrots and onions that we've used here. And it would also include parsnips and leeks if you did use them. I like to make this soup when I'm cooking dinner at night because I'm right in the kitchen so I can tend these in the oven because you stir them from time to time. Allow plenty of time for this roasting, and it takes longer than you think, an hour and a half. And then transfer it all to a great big stock pot with about 5.5 quarts of water in it. Now at home I use a turkey roaster, but we don't have enough room for the turkey roaster today, so I'm using the smaller pot, and I'm not going to be able to get all these vegetables in, but it gives you an idea. The seasonings are simple, but they really work. We have 3 bay leaves and 12 cloves. This adds a really nice undertone of flavor. I make all of my broths with whole cloves, and then some peppercorns and a handful of parsley. And by all means, include the stem. That's where the flavor is. Cover this and then put it in the oven and bake it for 12 hours at 200 degrees. I do that at night, and when I wake up in the morning, I have this superb brown broth. The fragrance is filling the house. I take it out, strain it, defat it, and freeze it. It's just like having money in the bank. My next recipe is an unusual combination for a sandwich. It makes a hit every time it's served, and it's called a Pennsylvania Dutch sandwich. And I've never seen this recipe published anywhere. It's one of those underground recipes that people tell themselves about. Have 8 ounces of julienne Swiss cheese, all ready to go. Add 8 ounces of cold boiled ham and an 8-ounce can of very well-drained sauerkraut. So you can see that this is really a Pennsylvania Dutch dish. Make sure it's drained well. And add a cup of mayonnaise, and by all means use the commercial kind. You don't need to make homemade mayonnaise for this. And some parsley for color. Then we're going to have caraway seed. A lot of people don't care for caraway seed, and this recipe calls for a scant teaspoon. It isn't going to hurt this sandwich at all if you leave it out because it has enough distinct flavor it'll stand on its own. But I'm going to add a teaspoon of caraway seed. Incidentally, seeds like caraway and poppy seed do get rancid, and it's a very good idea to keep those things stored in your freezer. And I just drop them in a little plastic sandwich bag and tuck them in there. And they'll last for a couple of years. Now we're going to mix this up. I like making this on a Saturday morning, and then we sort of nibble out of it all weekend. And if unexpected family drops in, we have sort of a nice sandwich to serve them. It can be served in a couple of ways. You could put this on a buffet and have your bread in a basket. Or if you like, you could make up the sandwiches. And one of the secrets of keeping sandwiches moist, if you've made them in advance, is to wring out a tea towel and put them on top of the sandwiches and then cover it with saran wrap, and that moisture keeps the bread from curling up. That's ready to go. I also like to use this on party ryes, the little tiny rye bread rounds, you know, and it makes a very elegant canopy, and you toss some parsley on top of that. Men really like this sandwich because it's hearty, but we're going today just use it as a sandwich for lunch. And I think probably I'm going to have one of these myself. Make a double recipe of this. You never have enough. Your husband's poker club would be most impressed if you presented this. You will add it to this tray. Are you noticing these pretty leaves that we have here? Those are cinnamon geraniums. I think that's neat. I think we should go over possibly and check the soup. And also I want to tell you a little bit about these sandwiches. One more thing. They taste better if the sandwich filling is prepared one day in advance, but don't fill them until you're quite ready to eat. This soup is ready to finish up. We're going to mash up those little cubes, but not totally. Do you see this old-fashioned masher? I bet this is 100 years old. Probably the Smithsonian would even like to have this masher, but it was in my family. No, don't mash them totally up, because when you eat the soup, you want to get a chunk of soup, and then you want the smoothness of the broth, because that varying texture adds to the sensual aspect of soup. And certainly that has something to do with people's enjoyment of food, the sensuality of it. To the broth, we're going to add 1 cup of milk and some parsley for color and a liberal splash of Worcestershire. The Amish use quite a few of these kind of condiments, Worcestershire, Tabasco, etc., because they really don't use a lot of fancy herbs. And every time I've added an herb to a dish, I always write optional behind it in the cookbook. This potato soup may have a reputation for being a country dish, but it's still a very luxurious soup, as you can see. Stick to your ribs. How pretty this is. The Amish, of course, would have raised the potatoes in their own garden, and the bacon that was used in it would have come from their own butchered pigs. Let's review the other dishes that we made today. The Crackerball soup, which is certainly a novel soup, and I'm going to garnish it now with lemon thyme. Lemon thyme is really perfect to garnish this soup with, because lemon thyme goes perfectly with chicken. The bean soup is a sturdy, flavorsome dish. And of course, we have these terrific Pennsylvania Dutch sandwiches, a first-class sandwich that I like to serve with a bottle of beer. It's a perfect accompaniment. And I don't want to forget this potato soup. Isn't it nice? And the granddaddy of all soups, basic beef stock, which does form the basis of so many sauces and soups. The quilt I chose today is called Ocean Waves, but it looks very much like a pattern that's called corn and beans. And since we had beans on the menu, it pleased me very much to show you this quilt that is similar to corn and beans. It surely is colorful, don't you think? This pattern is frequently seen in the Midwest, but it's not used very much among the Pennsylvania Amish. The small triangles create movement and currents in the quilt, just like the currents and movements in the water. Probably this unknown quilter never saw the ocean, but she did catch the feeling through her stitchery. This has, as you can see, a very wide border. This is quite unusual. See this feathered pattern here too? It is unusual for a Midwestern quilt because those quilts in the Midwest generally have more narrow bindings and borders than do the Pennsylvania quilts. It is a happy one, isn't it? So until next time, ess a gut. Eat good.
All recipes seen in this series are available in Marcia Adams' book, Cooking from Quilt Country. This hardcover contains nearly 200 Amish and Mennonite recipes with color photographs and descriptions of the food and folkways of America's heartland. The cost of the book is $24.95 plus handling. Please have your credit card ready when you call 1-800-325-2667. Series 2 of Amish Cooking from Quilt Country is available on home video for $59.95 plus shipping. All 13 programs in this second series are compiled on 3 VHS cassettes. Call 1-800-325-2667 for credit card orders.
Funding for Amish Cooking from Quilt Country was provided